When Mike Selle was born, geography, a subject he would eventually teach, was far more simple. There was only one continent: Pangaea. Here's some cave art that archaeologists believe show Mr. Selle as an infant. As an original resident of the supercontinent, Mr. Selle spent much of his time studying popular pursuits. During these formative years, he learned to hunt. And he learned to draw. He studied under the master artists of the day, Unk and Onganko, until he produced this, his masterpiece. After Pangaea broke apart, Mr. Selle found himself in Greece, where he studied philosophy. Here, he's discussing the virtues of seasoning and smoking various sausages. After the Greek civilization, the Romans rose to prominence. Mr. Selle served as one of Emperor Nero's chief advisors. He famously stated at the time, "Precepte luxuria sed implementi." This is, of course, when Mr. Selle discovered cigars, fishing, and women, although not in that order. During the Renaissance, Michelangelo carved his famous statue of Moses. Many art historians believe Mr. Selle was Michelangelo's model for this famous carving. You be the judge. Nearly 2 centuries later, Mr. Selle moved to the American colonies, where he was a witness to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He migrated westward and became an outlaw. Perhaps this was the influence of Nero. Here's the only known tintype of Selle the Kid. When World War I broke out, Mr. Selle became a decorated ace. When Prohibition was enacted in 1920, Mr. Selle cried. But when it was repealed in 1933, like all good Americans, he celebrated. Throughout much of the middle of the 20th century, Mr. Selle became an actor. Here he is in The Wizard of Oz, The Maltese Falcon, and later in the Western classic True Grit. During the 1970s, Mr. Selle embraced the new music wave sweeping the nation: disco. In the 80s, he abandoned disco for the upbeat tones of reggae and wrote a song that became an instant classic. Don't worry, be happy became his mantra for the next few decades. In the 1990s, Mr. Selle embraced hip-hop, performing with the supergroup Tre Maestro. Their #1 hit was the unforgettable "School's Dope, Fool." But for all his travels and worldly knowledge, there's one thing Mr. Selle does day in and day out, which we are all the better for.
His teaching.
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 Teaching. Teaching.
Teaching.
Teaching. Oh, teaching.
Yes, the Ti-Ching, the ancient art of braiding armpit hair. Where Mr. Selle learned this skill is unclear, but...
You idiot!
Hey, whoa, hey, that hurts!
You don't know what you're talking about. 39 years of teaching kids. 39 years. 39 years. 39 years. He's gonna miss those kids.